Excuse the mess in the background. I'm staying in a garage basically, and that white frame you see behind me is the bed that flips up. In fact, you won't believe it, but in this garage, there's a lot of stuff, but check out this. There's actually a rickshaw. My mum decided that buying a rickshaw would be a good idea. Now, this is a really weird rickshaw. It's a back-to-front rickshaw. You sit at the front, and if you look carefully, you'll see that there's a saddle at the back there. So you actually ride it from the back, and the people sit at the front. And you can see there's the wheels and all that. So I suppose I could give the class here, sitting on the rickshaw, authentically Indian style and all that, but doesn't feel that safe. I feel like it could tip over any time. So we're not going to give class in the rickshaw, but we're going to just sit at the end of the bed here. Okay, so we'll start with Jayarada Madhava, and then we'll continue reading from the introduction to Bhagavad-gita as it is by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It always pays to just check that everything's working, so let's have a look as we start Jayarada Madhava. Jayarada Madhava Kunja Bihari, Jayarada Madhava Kunja Bihari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari, Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari, Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Yamuna Tira Vanachari, Jayarada Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sorry, I dropped out there for a moment because my computer just blooped. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Okay. So reading from the Srimad Bhagavad-gita as it is by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And this is not the part we're up to. I have to search for it again. Here it is. We're continuing on from Jai Srila Prabhu's class. And I'll start from the beginning of this paragraph. Ishvara, the Supreme Lord, Jiva, the living entity, Prakriti, nature, Kala, eternal time, and Karma, activity, are all explained in Bhagavad-gita. Out of these five, the Lord, the living entities, material nature, and time are eternal. The manifestation of Prakriti may be temporary, but it is not false. Some philosophers say that the manifestation of material nature is false, but according to the philosophy of Bhagavad-gita, or according to the philosophy of Vaishnavas, this is not so. The manifestation of the world is not accepted as false, it is accepted as real, but temporary. It is likened unto a cloud which moves across the sky, or the coming of the rainy season which nourishes grains. As soon as the rainy season is over and as soon as the cloud goes away, all the crops which were nourished by the rain dry up. Similarly, this material manifestation takes place at a certain interval, stays for a while, then disappears. Such are the workings of Prakriti. But this cycle is working eternally. Therefore, Prakriti is eternal. It is not false. The Lord refers to this as my Prakriti. This material nature is the separated energy of the Supreme Lord, and similarly the living entities are also the energy of the Supreme Lord, although they are not separated but eternally related. So the Lord, the living entity, material nature, and time are all interrelated and are eternal. The other item, karma, is not eternal. The effects of karma may be very old indeed. We are suffering or enjoying the results of our activities from time immemorial. But we can change the results of our karma or our activity, and this change depends on the perfection of our knowledge. We are engaged in various activities. Undoubtedly, we do not know what sort of activities we should adopt to gain relief from the actions and reactions of all these activities, but it is also explained in the Bhagavad-gita. So today this is what we'll be discussing. Material nature, its temporary nature, its temporary yet eternal nature. That sounds like a contradiction. So let's see what it's specifically saying in this in this translation here. Om Jnana Tamarandisa Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshomni Tamjena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Paraya Krishna Prashaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminat Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Vichani Nevishesha Shunari Pashtata Deshatani. So it's saying here that out of these five, we'll just show what they are again: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, and Karma. That out of these five, the living entities, material nature, and time are eternal. Okay, so we can understand the Lord is eternal, naturally. It's also described in Bhagavad-gita that never was there a time that I did not exist, Ishvara, nor you, nor all these kings. This is the living entities, the jivas. And in the future, none of us will cease to be, and none of us will come into being. These are the statements of Bhagavad-gita. That the living being neither comes into being, or is coming into being, or will come into being. The nature is eternal. There is no beginning to the existence of the soul. And there's also no end. Okay, cool. So, this reference here that it is not false. Some philosophers say that the manifestation of material nature is false. But according to the Bhagavad-gita, or the philosophy of the Vaishnavas, this is not so. So the Mayavadis, Mayavadis and the Buddhists have this idea that this world is false. So the Buddhists, their basic idea is that nothing is real, and somehow or other we're reincarnating. Exactly who's reincarnating, they don't say, through different lives. But then when we realize that the world doesn't exist, then we stop existing and all our problems are over. It's totally nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. The Mayavadis have what's called covered Buddhism. The idea here is they say that this world is false. And actually, we are all Brahman. We're all spirit. Brahman, Brahma, Satyam, Jagan, Mithya. Which means they say that spirit is real and this universe is false. This material world is false. And their understanding is that actually we're all God. But somehow or other, we've been covered by Maya. The Supreme Soul, the Supreme Lord, has been covered. So a portion of the Supreme has been broken away into a fragment. And the objective of this fragment is to reconnect with the complete God, and then we'll realize we're God again, and we'll just exist in a state of impersonal bliss, without any relationships, without any activity, just a state of non-activity and supposedly blissful consciousness. This is the Mayavadi's idea. Of course, this is highly offensive. There is a condition like this of Brahma liberation, where one can be liberated from the material desires and be in a limbo position of Brahman. However, it's not considered eternal because there's no relationship, and the nature of the soul is Anandamaya Vyasat. It's seeking bliss. And I remember my spiritual master was giving an example. He said that if you have like a really big house, however nice that house is, if you're alone, you can be peaceful, but if you really want to have fun, you have to call a party. No. And so in a similar way, the soul gets happiness through relationships. That our nature is to serve the Lord, and to serve the Lord in relationship with other devotees of the Lord. This is where we get our real happiness, because that is our real natural position and our real it's what we're designed for, you could say. It's our nature, our undeniable nature, our Sanatana Dharma. And so the Mayavadi's idea that we can become God after liberating ourselves from this world is false. And the idea that this world is false is also not correct. There's a reason why the material world exists, and it exists eternally. We can hear the descriptions in Srimad Bhagavatam that the portion of the spiritual world is covered by Maya, and that's called the material world. And within this material world, there is a cycle of time. There's a grand universal scale of time, and then there's the very small scale of time. So on the great universal scale of time, we have this eternal material world where Mahavishnu is resting. And in that material world, he's breathing in and out. And as he's breathing, whole universes are being created and destroyed. And then within each universe, there's also a cycle of time. That just as we experience ourselves, there is a cycle of the planets. As the sun rises and sets, that's a day. As the moon becomes full and then disappears and again becomes full, that's called a month. So these are the different ways that we measure time through the movement of the planets. Also, the position of the planets in relationship to the stars are other ways that time is measured. So within this, and it's described in the Shastra, the scale of this time, that after millions and millions of years, the whole universe is destroyed. And even within that, there's temporary destruction of parts of the universe and then recreation. So I'm not going into technical detail because it's not in my memory. You can research these things for detail. But the principle is that there's a cycle that on the grandest scale of the material world is always existing. But as Lord Vishnu breathes in and out, the universes are being created and destroyed. So what happens is, if we're in a universe where we have not become liberated, we haven't reawakened our eternal relationship with the Lord, and therefore haven't gone back to Godhead, then what happens is we merge back into the body of Mahavishnu. And as a new universe is created, we again come out of the body of Mahavishnu and we're put into the material world. It's described that Lord Mahavishnu glances at the material universe, and through that, the form of that glance is called Sadashiva. And through Sadashiva, the living entities are impregnated into each universe. And Durga Devi, the consort of Lord Shiva, is the personification of the material world. So just as a husband and wife, the husband impregnates the wife, and therefore the children are produced in the same way, Lord Shiva and Parvati, when they unite, the living entities enter this world. And then Lord Brahma has his role of providing the bodies for these people. So this is the description given in Srimad Bhagavatam. And so let's just scroll on down a little bit further here. So it's saying the manifestation of the world is not accepted as false. It is accepted as real, but temporary. It is likened unto a cloud which moves across the sky with the coming of the rainy season, which nourishes grains. As soon as the rainy season is over, and as soon as the cloud goes away, all the crops which were nourished by the rain dry up. Similarly, this material manifestation takes place at a certain interval, stays for a while, then disappears. Such are the workings of Prakriti, but the cycle is working eternally. So it's not like a linear concept of time here, where there was no material world, then the material world appeared, and then it goes away and it's no longer there. It's a cycle. As Lord Vishnu is breathing in and breathing out, these different universes are being created and destroyed. But that's within the material universe, or the material world, we can just say, which contains many universes. That is eternally existing. And then the cycle is going on. And the analogy of the cloud is very interesting. So it means to say that I'm just thinking there's different ways to understand this. One understanding is the understanding that the living being, the nature of the living being, is to be in the eternal spiritual world, not to be covered. But as a Tatastha Shakti living being, there's always the possibility of being covered by material energy. And in that case, we come under the illusion of the material world. So Lord Vishnu is not under the illusion of the material world, but the living beings that are placed in it are covered. And while we are under the cloud of this material world, we experience, this time, this material time that we were talking about earlier. We experience the karma and reactions of what's going on in this material world. But as soon as we reignite our relationship with Krishna, and our karma is no longer present, we are no longer covered by this material world, and we become qualified to enter the spiritual world again. And so this is where we're getting the connection here of this karma and prakriti. So for an individual living being, when the living being is under the influence of the material energy, then the karma is acting. The desires and the actions of that living being result in reactions. And therefore, life after life, so many things are going on, and so many varieties of things are happening. According to each person's individual combination of desires and actions, different things happen. So thank you. I see there's a comment by Bhaktivatsala Prabhu. Thank you. The material world is all too real. It's a happening thing. And it's true, we experience it. That's the key factor here, is that as a conscious being, what we experience is a reality. And sometimes we may observe something which is an illusion, that we're seeing things in a way that is not how they really are, but it's still an experience. So that's what's going on for us here in this material world, is that we're experiencing something that may not really be based in our natural condition. We may be illusioned, but it's not to say that experience that we're having is not real, although it is temporary. When the illusion is taken away and we see things as they are, then we're no longer covered by that illusion. But it was all real. Our experience of it was certainly real. So thanks for the comment. And if anyone else likes to comment, it's always interesting to have some discussion. So it's saying here, as soon as the rainy season is over, the cloud goes away, and the crops that were nourished by the rain dry up. So in the same way that, when we leave this material world, it's because we've given up our material desires and we've reignited our relationship with Krishna, and therefore there's no more need to be under illusion, no more need to be in this material world, and it's no longer a reality for us. So from 2 points of view here, one point of view is that there's these different cycles of the different ages, the Satya, Dwapara, Treta, and Kali yugas. There's also, so these are things that are kind of on a universal scale. The material world is being created and destroyed on a cycle that affects many people at once. And at the same time, on an individual level, this material world exists just like a cloud is covering the sun. We are feeling separated from Krishna. We cannot see Krishna, just like you can't see the sun when the cloud is there. But when the cloud passes by and we see Krishna again, then, clouds are still existing. The material world is still existing, but it's not covering us anymore. So this is our, goal in this material world, is to develop our relationship with Krishna directly so that the clouds are no longer in the way. It's not to say the clouds aren't there still. The material world will still be there, but we don't have to be covered by the material energy and material world. So we'll continue on a little bit here and see what else it says. Therefore, Prakriti is eternal. It is not false, because this cycle is continually going on. And it's part of Krishna's energy. Krishna is eternal, and therefore this Prakriti is eternal. The Lord refers to this as my Prakriti. This material nature is the separated energy of the Supreme Lord, and similarly the living entities are also the energy of the Lord, although they are not separated but eternally related. So the Lord, the living entity, material nature, and time are all interrelated and are all eternal. However, the other item, karma, is not eternal. Okay. So just before we move into this next section, just want to talk about time a little bit here. How is it that time is eternal? Well, the idea is that as the material world is continually existing and continually going through the cycles, therefore this material time is eternally a part and parcel of that arrangement. Because we understand that the material world has said, the spiritual world has said that time is conspicuous by its absence. So what does it mean? It means material time is not present in the spiritual world. There's a concept of time, but it's not influencing like it is in the material world. In the material world, time is, Bhagavad-gita says, time, it destroys everything. Time is the process by which things, created and destroyed. But in the material world, spiritual world, there's no creation or destruction. And therefore, that influence of material time is not there. Time is only there as a servant of the Lord's pastimes in the concept of time. So let's continue on to karma now. However, the other item, karma, is not eternal. The effects of karma may be very old indeed. We are suffering or enjoying the results of our activities from time immemorial. But we can change the results of our karma or our activity, and this change depends on the perfection of our knowledge. We are engaged in various activities. Undoubtedly, we do not know what sort of activities we should adopt to gain relief from the actions and reactions of all these activities, but this is also explained in the Bhagavad-gita. So basically, the summary here is that these actions and reactions that we're suffering in this material world are not eternal, because it is possible to get relief from this karma and be liberated to the spiritual world in our eternal relationship with the Lord. So it's really use of words here. So the other karma is not eternal. So it says here, the effects of karma may be very old indeed. We are suffering or enjoying the results of our activities from time immemorial, but we can change the results of our karma. So ultimately we can get free from this karma. So I think it's interesting here where Prabhupada says that karma is not eternal. It may be very old, and that we're suffering or enjoying the results from time immemorial. So there's a expression in Sanskrit which is often quoted, which is Nadi Karma. So Anadi is a word that's related to eternal. Anadi means without beginning. And when we use this word, Anadi, it can be understood in different ways. So Adi, Adi. Adi means cause, just like in the Brahma Samhita. Anadi Adi Govinda. Anadi Adi. That Govinda, the Supreme Lord, He is the cause of all causes, and he has no other cause before him. So this is this word adi, same thing. Anadi, no cause. Sarva karana karanam, cause of all causes. Anadi. I'm getting a little muddled up between karana and adi. But in any case, the word means without beginning. The Supreme Lord has no beginning. So this understanding is a controversial point. Different people have different understandings of this. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's making the point in one of his writings, I forget which one, maybe Chaitanya Shikshamrita or maybe the Jiva Dharma. But what he is basically saying is that we can't say at what time the living entity entered the material world, because the existence of the living entity is eternal. And the time that the karma starts is simultaneous with entering the material world. And so we can't really say. And also we can understand that if this, just like if there's so many destructions of the universe and recreations, we can't say when the soul came in from material time, because it's from before material time. So to explain that in more detail, suppose we were existing in the universe and we didn't get liberated. Then when the next universe is created, we again come out of the body of Mahavishnu and enter into this universe that we're in now. So how can we say when we entered the material world? What time reference have we got to use? Because material time begins at the beginning of the creation of the universe. So therefore, if we've existed in a previous universe, there's no way we can actually put a material time, that I appeared, at such and such number of yugas from the beginning of the creation. If we were put into this world when the universe was created, then how can we say when the time was? So we can't use any material designation of time to say when we entered, this material world. And so there's different understandings. Some people take the meaning of anadi literally. They say that we have, there's another expression as well, which is nityabada, eternally conditioned. And so this is taken to understand, combining the idea of Nadi Karma and nityabada, that the soul has eternally existed in the material world and has never been in a relationship with the Supreme Lord in the spiritual world, and that it's only when we, by fortune, meet a devotee and practice Krishna consciousness and develop our relationship with the Supreme Lord that we get to go back to this, to get to go to the spiritual world and experience that relationship and never come back here again. It's described in the Bhagavad-gita that having once gone to the spiritual world, we never come back. And therefore, these devotees who say that we've been in this material world eternally, they argue that if when we go to the spiritual world, we never come back, then it means that we could never have been there before. We must have always been in the material world. So this is one argument. This is called the no-fall understanding. And there is another understanding, which is generally what Prabhupada spoke when he was asked directly about this subject. The way that Prabhupada described it was that we have our eternal relationship with Krishna that existed before our entering this material world. And for some reason that we cannot understand, we chose to try to experience life without Krishna in the center by putting ourselves in the center. And because of that thought, we entered the material world. And Prabhupada describes that actually we are never separate from Krishna, we're always with Krishna, even in the material world, because he describes it like being in a dream, that actually we are with Krishna, but for a moment, if you want to think of it like that, in terms of the spiritual eternality. For a moment, we are living in a dream and imagining being separate from Krishna. And that moment, so to speak, in the spiritual world can be millions and millions of years and lifetimes in this world. But when we reawaken our Krishna consciousness, that cloud of material nature goes away, and we again return to the spiritual world. So these are the two main kind of understandings that devotees have, and there's great controversy and great arguments about this. There is another understanding which is described by some, that souls are continually being created in from the point between the material world and the spiritual world, and then the souls at that point choose which way they want to go, and then they either go to the spiritual world or the material world. I don't personally find this argument very satisfactory, for the reason that it's described that the soul is eternal, that it was never created and never came into being. I mean, someone could argue that souls are created in the spiritual world before material time started, and so that could be a logical argument to justify that understanding. But then with the idea of the soul either being eternally in the material world, or at the time of creation somehow or other choosing to come to the material world, it seems it has the problem of the idea that Krishna is rolling a dice or flipping a coin, that some of the living beings are created in the spiritual world and they stay there eternally and never come to this material world. Others are put into the material world without really any choice of the soul. You know, the idea that the soul is put into a position where they choose right at the beginning. Well, there's no way you can choose something unless you know what your options are. So if someone chooses the material world right at the beginning of their creation, then either they had a small taste of being, with Krishna, or they had no knowledge of that and somehow just chose without knowledge, without informed consent. Sorry, I had to just throw that in. Like if we're choosing the material world without a choice, then it seems unfair that some would be put in the material world and some in the spiritual world. So this is the problem with the no-for philosophy, is that it appears that Krishna is putting some into the material world, some into the spiritual world without a choice on our part. And this doesn't seem fair. Why does one get put here and one get put there? Prabhupada often speaks about free will, that we've come to this material world because of free will. And therefore, it's our choice to come here rather than Krishna making the choice for us. So I think that's, what Prabhupada explains about there. And on the other side, those who don't accept the idea of falling down from the spiritual world, they say that how can Krishna allow someone who's in his pastimes, how can they allow him to fall into the material world? So these are essentially the two arguments. Another argument based on some of the Shastric teachings is the idea that, as I said, that Lord Chaitanya came to teach what no one else had taught before, love of Krishna, especially in the conjugal rasa. So this particular idea indicates that we can, by our sadhana, we can determine which type of rasa we have in the spiritual world. So if our sadhana determines our rasa, then it seems like the rasa is not predetermined, that we haven't had it before. And therefore we need to be very careful in how we perform our sadhana so that we can attain the spiritual destination, that we desire. Whereas those who believe in the fall philosophy, their idea is that we have an eternal relationship that's already existing. And when we practice sadhana, naturally we will return to that original condition. The Brihat Bhagavatamrita is an interesting book in this connection because it describes Gopakumar. And Gopakumar, he was given initiation and given a Gopal mantra by his guru. By chanting this mantra, he traveled all over the universe and met many devotees. He even went to Vaikuntha. He even went to Dwarka, I believe. And even there, he wasn't satisfied. He didn't feel like this was his proper place until finally he returned to the material world. He practiced Sankirtan, and finally he returned to Krishna in Krishna's pastimes as a cowherd boy. And Krishna was saying, I've been waiting for you for so long. And, they had this experience of reuniting with each other. So the different philosophers will understand this in different ways. Those who believe the idea that Prabhupada was presenting about that we are eternally in a relationship with Krishna, but we've come to this world and then we reawaken that original relationship, they'll say that's what's happening with Gopakumar. He wasn't satisfied, even though he went to different places in the spiritual world, because he had his eternal relationship with Krishna as a cowherd boy. And therefore, it was only when he became a cowherd boy, or reawakened that relationship, that he was satisfied, and Krishna was welcoming him back as a friend that had gone away and come back. Those who are of the no-fall philosophy, their understanding is that at the time of initiation, the spiritual master has given him the Gopal mantra, and therefore, by the mercy of the spiritual master, he had the opportunity to have a relationship with Krishna as a cowherd boy. And because of that, he was, his relationship with Krishna as a cowherd boy was the mercy of the spiritual master rather than a pre-existing condition, it's not a disease, right? A pre-existing relationship that was already there. So it's very, very interesting. You can see, that there's arguments for these things in both ways. I'm not specifically talking about Shastra here, but just the general concepts and sort of pluses and minuses of these different understandings. We'll see if there's any other points which come to mind which are interesting in this respect. But yeah, one of the points is with Nadi Karma and Nityabada. The strong argument that the no-fall people have is that when it says Nadi Karma, we should take it literally. We should take Shastra literally. When it says Nityabada, we should take it literally, that the soul has been eternally bound. But the trouble is, you can't really take it literally. There's many parts of Shastra which use words that cannot be taken literally. Just like Nityabada, Nitya means eternal, but without beginning and without end. And so therefore, if we take the term Nityabada literally, it means that these living beings, Nityabada jivas, have always been in the material world and they will always be in the material world. So that doesn't align with the understanding that when we awaken our relationship with Krishna, we can return to the spiritual world. It can't be taken literally as no beginning and no end. And, Anadi also, it can be taken in that way. That no beginning can be understood, that we can't put a material time on it because it came before the beginning of the creation. So this is, how, although we may like to take things literally, it's not always possible. I don't have other examples off the top of my head, but these are just the two keywords we're talking about here. So it'd be interesting to have this conversation further. I find that often these types of conversations are very much in the mood of a battle. In Shastra, Bhagavad-gita purport, Prabhupada says that there's three kinds of conversations. One is jalpa, just talking and just not really, just wasting time, basically. Hot air. for example, talking arguments that can be used for or against the same argument. It's kind of like, doesn't really get you anywhere. Another type of discussion is called vitandi. The whole idea is, how can I win? What are my arguments that support my arguments? Arguments that don't support me, I won't say. I'll try not to let anyone notice them. And if they do come up, I'll see what I can find to refute that argument. And so the goal is to win. It's not, government in, what do we call it? Politics and propaganda. So I hope I'm still connected here. Getting some signals. Anyhow, maybe I'm saying things that they don't want you to hear, and therefore I'm being shut down. Jokes. So, so this Vitandi is just trying to win. But what Bhagavad-gita says, Krishna says that of all, I forget exactly the wording, but of all conversation, I am Vada. And Vada means conclusive truth. That means our goal in our conversation is to find the truth. Conclusions are being reached, and this may often happen. But our goal should be to understand the truth, and it should be based on Shastra. Not that I have made my opinion, and therefore I'm going to try to crush anyone who has a different opinion. This is not a good strategy, not a good way of approaching it. So with that in mind, we'll just wind up here. To summarize the class today, we were talking about how Krishna, the Ishvara, Supreme Lord, the living beings, the jivas, the material world, and time are all eternal. How is time and the material world eternal? It's because the material world is always existing here for the souls who choose not to surrender to Krishna. And there's within this material world, there's a cycle of creation and destruction, and that's called time. Whereas karma is not eternal, because when the living entity chooses to serve Krishna and give up the material world and surrender fully to Krishna, the material world will still go on without him, but his karma is gone. There's no more reactions for that person. And entering into the spiritual world, there is no more material reactions. There's a sense of time as a servant of the Lord, but it doesn't destroy like in the material world. And rather than the material prakriti, we have the Daivi prakriti, the material spiritual energy. So this is how it's explained by Prabhupada in this purport. And in relationship to this, we were talking about how it seems that karma is eternal. A Nadi Karma, it's without beginning. But Prabhupada in this purport is saying that it may seem like it's very old, from time immemorial. However, he's saying that no, it's not eternal. It had a beginning before this material, before our entry into the material world, and it will end when we enter the spiritual world. So this was a controversial point. We're talking about whether were we with Krishna in his pastimes before entering the material world or not. And we discussed some of the arguments back and forwards from this point of view. Just in summary. So, I'll end here, and if there's any questions, again, type it up in the comments. It's always interesting to have a discussion. And again, let's see if we can have our discussions from the platform of Vada, quoting from Shastra, applying our understanding of Shastra with logic and philosophical discussion, rather than trying to choose a position and defeat the others so that I can win and you can lose. Instead of that mood, let's see if we can try to have our discussions in a way to understand different points of view, and therefore, based on Shastra, come closer to the truth. So thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavad-gita as it is. Ki Jai. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay. Hare Krishna.